Yay.
Okay, hi again.
Okay. All right. Welcome to Improv. I see we have some participants, and I am Shauna Kogler, and my co-conspirators in Improv are
Allie Hayden,
Mary Ann Goff,
and we're going to walk through an introduction to Improv to help you do what you do best, work with kids. So first, we just would like to thank you for taking on this program and these kids. I love some of these posters, especially it's the tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So hands-on, they're hands-on, not you as a team manager hands-on, but they're doing hands-on, helps them learn. And you can look at these posters later, and we can send you this whole PowerPoint presentation, and then you can go through it again at your leisure. And you met all of us. And can they see you too, Kate? That's Kate.
Yeah, they can see me. I'm Kate. I'm just listening.
Your regional challenge masters are all on here too, and you can, when we send you the slideshow, you can look and find out who your regional challenge masters are. And most of us are also regional challenge masters, so one of them might be us. Okay, so just brief intro with the skit. It's a two-part improv skit with lots of elements. So 2 figureheads, which are coins, and we'll show you the document later that you have to fill out, and that corresponds to numbers on your tournament data form, TDF. The tail will be the focus of the skit, and that's provided at the tournament. 2 genres, comedy and tragedy, and you'll flip a coin. Well, the timekeeper announcer will flip a coin before the 2-minute prep time and tell you which genre you're going to be starting in, comedy or tragedy. The flip is a tournament provided piece of paper that is in a designated space on your in your area, in your presentation area, that somebody from your team will have to pick up and read and react to it, and then switch from verbal to nonverbal. So you'll start your skit out in verbally, and then after the flip's picked up, you switch to the other genre and to nonverbal. So, and all that will be explained in full a little bit later. Okay.
All right. So figureheads are up next, and each of the teams will research a number of figureheads. So for elementary kids, they research 6, middle level is 8, and secondary and university research 10 different figureheads. So it corresponds with their age there. And the most important thing to realize about the figurehead research is that teams can research details about the coins, but the research about the figurehead itself, whether it's a person or an animal or an object such as Lady Liberty, only that research will actually get you points towards your challenge. So it's very important to make sure you know ideas, personality traits, characteristics, and something about the person or animal or object that's represented on the coin, rather than just what year and what country it's from. We want to know about that person as well. So the figureheads will be integrated as characters in the skit, and that is just one of the fun elements that is part of the skit here.
The research part of this is the hardest thing to get your team to do. They have to research on their own, or I suppose you could bring in a bunch of computers and have them do it one day at a meeting. But it's important that they start the research quickly to get the information about the figurehead so they can practice with that information. Go ahead.
Is it me? So this is the list of the figureheads that are available, and you can see there's more than they need. So when the kids are looking through, they're going to choose the ones that they're the most interested in, and then go online to, or wherever they might even go to the library to look up some of these things. And it's really important for, like we said earlier, for them to find out things about the specific characters on the coins. So spend some time with them on that, because they want to find characters who are going to be interesting to do a story about. And so they may find some that they really like and other they don't have any interest at all. So it's up to them to pick the ones that they want to include as their figurehead choices.
The tail. So the tail's the focus of the entire skit, and it involves the figureheads. They'll get 2 figureheads. The tournament supplies the paper that is selected in the prep area, and it will tell the tale. And some examples might be the figureheads are working at the world's smallest zoo, or they're building a boat. So the 2 figureheads that they'll choose in the prep area before they do their presentation will have to integrate together and build the boat, for example. So that's the tale through the whole thing.
And another element that teams will need to research is comedy and tragedy as theatrical genres. So that's something that the teams can interpret and represent how they want. Tragedy doesn't always have to be extremely sad and depressing, but we do need to make sure there is separation between comedy and tragedy so that the appraisers can tell the different genres they're representing and be able to award them points for that. So the coin toss at the beginning, which the timekeeper announcer will do, will determine which genre is presented first. And this is important because it means that whichever one is first will be done using words, and then the second one will be nonverbal, because after the flip happens, you'll switch genres as well as from verbal to nonverbal. So it's really good to be able to have your teams practice doing both genres of comedy and tragedy in both verbal and nonverbal presentations. And yeah, again, just make sure you can tell a contrast between comedy and tragedy.
And the flip is really an important part of this challenge, because they start a story telling one kind of a story, and then at some point during the story, they're going to enable the flip. And the way that works is that they will, when they register or when they check in, they're going to pull a flip and hand it to the prep appraiser. They won't know what that flip is till whenever they decide to open it up during their skit. So their story is going along. It's either comedy or tragedy. It starts out verbal, and then when when they choose to have the flip happen, there's going to be a card in the performance area that is the flip, and they will pick that up. And once they pick that up, they read it out loud, and that's going to activate all these things that we've been talking about. So the flip is going to be something that happens that's going to affect the story. And do we have any examples here of what the flip is? Okay, there it is. The roof blew off, or the street turned into syrup. So if they're telling a story and they're building a ship, and then the roof blows off, how does that affect their story? At the same time, they're going from verbal to nonverbal, and from either comedy to tragedy or tragedy comedy. So 3 things are happening at once. And
this is Kate. Just if you guys have questions, make sure you write them in the question and answer box in the bottom of your screen. And that way, if you have any questions for Marianne, Allie, or Shauna, they'll be able to answer them. Sorry to interrupt, Marianne.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, so the way the procedure of this part works is that they will have already started their skit and been being verbal and either comedy or tragedy. And then at some point, and that's up to the team, no one's going to tell them when to do it, they will pick up that flip card and they're supposed to read it out loud. Now, because the flip changes it from verbal to nonverbal, they can read the flip out and then they can't say anything else. If they pick it up and they don't read it out loud, right when they pick it up. They can't read it out loud later because now we're in the nonverbal section. So they can read it silently to themselves, but they can't actually read it out loud unless they do it as soon as they pick it up.
Team has to know, sorry, that when you picked up that flip, whether you read it out loud or not, that's when they switch to nonverbal and comedy tragedy. So that's something you really need to have them practice.
It really is the trigger for everything that happens in the second part of the skit.
Tournament procedures. In the prep area, always arrive at least 20 minutes before your presentation time. You'll turn in all your research and your forms, and they'll be checked by the prep area appraisers. And that's when you'll randomly select your improv elements without looking at them. They'll usually have a bag that the kids reach in and pull out and just hand it to the appraiser. And so they'll choose 2 figureheads, and those correspond to the figureheads that they've researched on their tournament data form. They'll pick the tail, which is tournament provided, and the flip, which is tournament provided also. And that will be placed in a designated space in the presentation area. And we always try to make it real noticeable, like a big neon piece of paper or a chair or a table, something that they know it's there. And then they can pick it up anytime after the skit begins.
All right. So prep and presentation time. All teams will have 2 minutes in prep time, and at that time they will learn what their figureheads and tail is, and they'll have their coin toss there to figure out if they're starting in comedy or tragedy. So once they have those elements decided, those will be written down and given to the team, so they're not scrambling in their minds the last minute to try to remember which figureheads they actually have. They'll have a piece of paper which will lay that out for them, and then they'll have 2 minutes to work on their presentation and skit. At this time, it's often good for teams to be loud because the appraisers want to be able to give them points for what they're planning and doing, but it's hard if the appraisers can't hear them. So another thing is at this time, appraisers may get really close to the kids and listen in or make motions like they're trying to hear, just because those appraisers are wanting to be able to give points to the team. If the team is done planning before their 2-minute prep time is over, that is totally fine too. They just should say something to indicate that they have completed their planning process so that the timekeeper can move on to the presentation. And then they have 5 minutes for presentation time. There's a lot of stuff, of course, to get in during this 5 minutes. We want to incorporate the figureheads and the tail. Make sure to incorporate the genre, either comedy or tragedy at the beginning, and then after you have your flip, we'll switch to the other genre as well as nonverbal. And if they are finished before the 5 minutes is up, they are able to say something that indicates that they're finished even though they are in the nonverbal part. So they could say, "And we've all had a great time." Something to indicate that they have finished is allowed to be verbally said.
And one thing I was thinking as we were talking about the prep area and the prep time, those are 2 different things. So the prep area is where the teams come to check in at their tournament site. It's where they bring all their research and where they do all the picking that we talked about earlier. The prep time happens once they go into the presentation room and they've been given all of their improv elements. Then they have 2 minutes. That's called the prep time. So that happens in a different place than the prep area, just, to kind of keep straight, because it sounds like it might be the same thing, but they're actually 2 different things. So, so they'll have their, get all their information, and they'll do their prep time, and then it's time for the skit. So the timekeeper announcer, when their 2 minutes of prep time is up, the timekeeper announcer will tell them that it's time to begin the skit, and then they'll say begin. And so at that time, they've got 5 minutes. So It says at any time after your team begins a skit, your team may pick up the flip to begin including it in the skit and switch from verbal to nonverbal, as well as comedy to tragedy. But be aware that they're being scored on verbal and nonverbal, and they're being scored on comedy and tragedy. So if they pick up the flip card really early, then they're not going to have a whole lot of that first part that they're being scored on. So make sure they learn about how to fit all the elements in before they do the flip. So they'll do their whole skit, and then at the end, the timekeeper will announce stop. And it doesn't matter if they're finished or not. They will still require them to stop. And that's when, the timekeeper announcer is really good about, talking to the kid, when it's over, if they're not done, it's, hey, let's hear it for them. They did a great job, so that they don't feel like, they're losing out by being stopped in the middle of their skit. And the other thing is your team can, like we said, they can choose to say time verbally to indicate the end of the skit. A lot of times younger teams, when they finish, they just sort of stop. And then as appraisers, we're trying to figure out if they're really done or not, because we don't want to cut them off if they aren't done. So it does help to make them aware, to, remind them that the appraisers need to know when it's finished, and if they can come up with a way to let us know that, it's helpful. And then they'll take a bow and talk to the appraisers.
Hey, Marianne, Julie has asked you to go back a slide.
Okay.
And she said the prep time is confusing.
Yeah.
I've tried to, yeah. So prep, there's check-in at the prep area appraiser table, and that's where they turn in and have all their research checked and pick their elements, and then the timekeeper announcer will bring them into where they're performing, and before then they're going to tell them what their figureheads entail is, and flip the coin for genre, and hand them the paper with all the information they need to do their 2-minute prep time. So the timekeeper will say, your 2-minute prep time begins, and say begin, and then they'll be able to figure out what they want to do for their 5-minute presentation and skit in 2 minutes, and they can use that time to plan. Then the timekeeper announcer will say stop at the end of the prep time, and they have to stop. They can't keep talking. They have to take all their stuff back to the lunch area, and the timekeeper will place the flip in the designated place on their stage area, their presentation area. Then they introduce the team and say, are you ready to, do heads up with this team? And they'll say, yay. And then they'll say your 5-minute presentation time begins, and they'll start the clock. And then at the end of 5 minutes, they'll stop. Like Marianne said, even if they're not done, but if they are done, they can indicate somehow that they are done. I hope that helps answer that question.
She's asking if it's a total of 2-minute prep time or 4.
2-minute prep time, 5-minute presentation time.
And in that 2 minutes, that's when they can walk around the performance area if they want. They can talk about, who's going to do what, when, how they're going to stage it. They can do whatever planning they want in there. And we talked earlier about how when we're listening to them, sometimes we can't hear them. So it does help if they're told to, as part of as they're getting ready, realize that people are going to be listening to them, and we're scoring them on what we hear. So if we can't hear them, it's hard to score everything. So make sure they're not surprised.
Yeah, and that's a teamwork thing that we're looking at too. How they work well together when they're planning that 2 minutes.
Earlier it was indicated that they may make a closing statement. Can the statement be just the word time?
Yes. Yep.
Should we move on to where we were there?
Yeah.
We can always come back to if we have more questions. Okay, so now we're at post-performance here, which we kind of mentioned a little bit. So this is the time when appraisers will come up and ask kids questions. They'll ask about things that kids are particularly proud of in their performance or their process. So there's just some example questions here, but they might be things like, what was your favorite part of the challenge? How did you practice doing verbal and nonverbal? What did you like best about the challenge heads up? And what was fun or difficult for you? And this really gives kids time to give additional insight to the appraisers that they might not have been able to see in the 5-minute challenge or the 7 minutes total that the appraisers have witnessed. Because a lot of times kids put a lot more work into their challenge and solution than we happen to see in those few minutes. So it's a time for them to kind of brag on their successes and tell us what they really liked or didn't like, or what they might do differently next time.
Is this me now? I've lost track.
Yeah, I lost track too.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Sure.
Okay, so improv is different than a lot of other challenges in that we're not bringing a bunch of scenery and costumes in, but there are certain things that they are allowed to bring with them. So they can bring research notes that relate to the figureheads on the coins. They can have those in written type, photocopied, any form they want, that they can use only during their planning time. So once their planning time is over, they're not allowed to actually use it in the performance. So, but they have it to refer to while they're planning. Now, what they can't bring is books, pre-written scripts, pre-planned jokes, templates, models, drawings, any ideas for characters. I've seen teams comes in where they'll have name, like a person's name, and then they'll have certain facts next to that person's name, and that's pre-planning who's going to say what. They just can have the actual facts that they want to try to get into their skit. They can also bring a pencil and paper for planning during their 2 minutes time. So sometimes they like to write down things to remember, but they cannot use that during the actual performance. And they can also bring a clean copy of the challenge. That means it can't be one that has any notes on it, just the challenge itself. And then the thing to remember about this one, and some teams aren't aware of, there are no props, no scenery or costumes. So they should not come in any kind of costume or bring any scenery or props. It's all what they do through their performance that we see their setting and things like that. So obviously they have to wear something. So the clothes that they wear to the side can't contribute to the solution. Usually they just end up wearing jeans and their team shirts, which is fine, but they can't use those in any way. So a lot of times kids will do things like if they're wanting to be a nerd character, they might try like hike up their pants or something. You're not allowed to do that because you're not allowed to use your clothing as a costume. They can also bring a wristwatch because we've talked about timing, 2 minutes and 5 minutes, but the kids aren't going to be able to ask how much time is left. So sometimes kids, they'll have somebody who's in charge of sort of keeping track of time, which is fine. But the official timekeepers watch is the one that count. But it can't help them kind of tell how far they are in the story. So it's important that the wristwatch is silent. And it says wristwatch specifically, not like sometimes they want to wear a stopwatch around their neck. It says wristwatch, so it has to be on their wrist. And it cannot be incorporated in any way. So like the example is they can't look at their watch and see Dad will be here in 2 hours. Because then they're using it as a prop. We did have one year where a student had his phone in his pocket that they were using for timing, and he pulled it out and used it as a prop in the course of the skit. And that would end up with a deduction if they did that. So we don't want that to happen. They also can't use smartwatches, and they've got a definition here. So it's a mobile device with a touchscreen display designed to be worn on the wrist. So, any of the fancy watches that have computer interfaces, they can't use. And you may, like it says, you may not ask the appraisers for how much time is left for either planning or for their skit.
Which is different than last year. You could ask during your planning time, but not the skit. But now it's neither one.
So there's a question. So they can't use a watch with a timer function and start the timer when time starts?
if it's not, like, I think some watches have a stopwatch function on them, but they're not a smart watch. Donna, would you say that's an okay kind of thing?
I
Or?
think that's okay. It just has to be silent. You know,
Ah.
can't make any noise. So if they did the time going up and just let it keep going, I guess that would be okay. Yeah, because I've got a watch like that. You can do that on, but as long as it makes no noise. Yeah.
And then the other question that came up was, when you're calling time and telling the appraisers that you're done, can you say more than just the word time? Like, can you say, hey, we're done, or we're all finished? Because you're in the non-verbal section. So the question, she wants to know how much you can say to indicate that you're done.
What do you think, Marianne? Maybe that should be a clarification.
I feel like it's always good if we don't want to come up down and say for sure what it is. It's probably best to write for a clarification, just because we don't want to tell you something that at another level they may decide isn't. They may not agree with us, and we're not the international challenge masters, so we have to decide whatever they say.
Any other questions? Nope.
Is it my turn?
I think so.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, I would, as far as, because in the challenge, just real quick about the time thing, it says after the skit, it says your team may choose to say time. But it doesn't say anything more than that. So
Okay.
I would write in for clarification for more than the word time verbally. So, because we don't know the answer to that yet.
I apologize for being misleading there.
Oh no, that's okay. I hadn't thought about it. That's why we have these sessions. So you want to have your 6 copies of your completed tournament data form that shows your researched figureheads on page 1, and make sure you have all the copies with you and extras probably, and filled out before you come to the tournament. Copy of the completed page 3, which is your reflection of the creative process, and that just tells all of us who read them just how your season went and how their creative process was formed for your team. And we do read these and get information to try and make our program better through better creative processes. Make sure you bring 2 copies of the Declaration of Independence, and that's in the Rules of the Road. One is for us, for the Improv Challenge, and one is for the Instant Challenge. And then we don't have an expense report, yay, which is always good. And this is your tournament data form here. And 6 for elementary, etc. And yeah, the prepper appraiser will fill in the tail, which you'll choose during your check-in, and the genre will be determined by the flip right before your 2-minute prep time, planning time. And then what's on the bottom there? The flip. That will be written down beforehand, yeah, in the prep area. There's your Declaration of Independence. It's on page 45 of Rules of the Road, somewhere around there.
Also, the Declaration of Independence and the tournament data sheets are available on the destinationimagination.org resource site, and they're available there in fillable PDFs.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm full of interesting facts, Allie.
And there's your creative process. You guys fill out in a thoughtful, sometime during some downtime before you get to the tournament, go through your season and answer those questions as a team.
And it is kind of something that it helps the kids actually realize what they've learned over the course of the year when they actually stop and break it down into these pieces and think about it. And I've read a lot of these, and it's really interesting to see the comments that teams have. And they really do help inform some of the things we do with our training.
And then your team identification sign, This is a fun thing for your team, but it's also an informative thing for the appraisers. And we just want to make sure that the team signs have your team name, number, and school or organization and what level they're performing at. And this is just to make sure that we know that teams are at the right stage or right area to perform. So we just want to make sure they haven't gone to the wrong place and the right people are seeing them, because your grandma might be a little bit sad if she goes to your performance and then you never show up to your own performance. But the other part is, especially with improv, since kids don't have props for this challenge, it's just a way for them to be fun and creative and have something that they bring to the tournament that they either could have whipped together at the last minute or they could be really proud of if they want to put the effort in for it. That is up to them.
Okay, here we are. This is a bird's eye view of the presentation area that is available to the kids. Now it says minimum of 8 by 10 feet. It can be more, it will not be less, but it is good for them to practice in different sizes. So you can have them practice in just 8 by 10, but also have them, give them an opportunity to practice in a larger space. Because sometimes when you're in a bigger space, it helps if you can fill up more space. So have them figure out how they would use whatever kind of space they have. Now it says that there's a launch area that may be used as part of the presentation area. And it depends on what tournament you're at, exactly where the launch area is. Sometimes there's a line that marks it off, and sometimes it's just part of the presentation area. But if there is a line that kind of separates the launch area from the presentation area, it's important for the kids to know that they don't have to stay in the launch area. During their prep time, they can go out into the presentation area and practice. And at the end of 2 minutes, they'll be called back to the launch area. And once they say begin, your time begins, they can go fill up that whole area. Make sure, sometimes if you put a line down, kids won't cross it. So make sure that they're aware of how much space they have and that they don't have to and really shouldn't just stay in the launch area. Now, when they're in that area, they're not allowed to use anything that may happen to be in there. We're often in classrooms and we're in school, so a lot of times there might be a whiteboard in the background that has a marker next to it. They can't write on the wall, on the whiteboards. They can't, like sometimes there's a podium. They can't hide behind it because that would be using scenery, which we're not allowed to have. So they can only deal with what being in the space without using any furniture that might be there that we were unable to move.
So this is what your scoring elements look like. You have your skit, all your improv elements, and then teamwork and overall presentation. Clear and effective storytelling. Allie, do you want to mention about the storytelling that for practicing?
Sure. It's just important to make sure that your teams remember that all stories have a beginning, a middle, and end. And it's a good thing to practice because when they're doing their skit, they have so many elements to remember in this one. So sometimes thinking about a beginning and middle and end can help with timing. And in this instance, it'll also help have your kids remember to do their flip and switch in time to be able to adequately portray both comedy and tragedy. So as you're going through and practicing those elements of comedy, tragedy, verbal, nonverbal, another good thing, since we just need one more thing to throw in there to think about is storylines and making sure you guys have a complete and awesome story. And that's kind of too what Marianne was saying with younger children. It's sometimes more important to practice that because the appraisers aren't really sure if they've completed their story and if the appraiser should start applauding them or whatnot there. So making sure there's a clear ending also kind of goes hand in hand with that.
And, start small, like start with like 3 little pigs or 3 bears, and make sure, they have a beginning, middle, and end. They use practice embarrassed with all tragedy or half comedy, half tragedy. You can use instant challenges to practice the elements of the, pulling in the figureheads and the comedy, tragedy, and verbal, nonverbal. So instant challenges are a great way to bring in those elements for them to practice and talk about. And you can see, go ahead.
An easy way to start doing that is any instant challenge you might do regularly, have your team complete the instant challenge regularly, and then have them complete the same instant challenge non-verbally. Just starts to get them thinking about that.
And another thing might be with when they're doing their instant challenges, like if have them do it as a character. Like if they have these different figureheads, have them each be one of those figureheads and use the characteristics that figurehead has to actually try to solve the instant challenge.
I have to add that to my slide. I like that comment. That's good.
Oh.
Speaking of instant challenges, yeah.
Whose turn is it?
I don't know.
I'll go.
Okay.
So besides the central challenge, which is our heads up challenge, you will also have to do an instant challenge, which you won't know until you get to the tournament. And it's worth 25% of the score. And your roadmap, which I looked at this year, it's massive, but it's a great resource for instant challenges and how to do instant challenges. And Rules of the Road has the procedures for instant challenge at your tournament. But practice, like Ellie said, practice different kinds of instant challenges, performance-based, task-based combination with characters, the figurehead characters, with the comedy tragedy, with the nonverbal verbal. Even if they've done an instant challenge once, do it again using those different elements. And it just teaches them those skills, and then they can transfer them over into their actual practicing with their performance elements. Thank you.
And actually, this is a place where instant challenges you can use to help teach them certain skills. So if you're working on teaching them how to face the audience or to project to the audience, you can have them do an instant challenge skit and then talk when they're done about, remember, your audience is over here, make sure that, they say no butts facing the audience. So you can talk about those sort of things. You could talk about how to stage, how to have people in different places. And you can do that when you're teaching instant challenge, not when you're working on your specific challenge, but when you're doing instant challenge, you can teach a lot of these skills.
And that's not interference.
Correct.
Yeah. So we talked about possibly putting in a team clarification earlier for the question of, can we say more than one word at the end of our presentation besides just time? So this is how you do it. You go to the di.org site, click on team challenges, clarifications, then onto heads up, and then you'll see team clarifications, and you can go there and ask a question of the International Challenge Masters, and they will send that back to you just for your team to read. No one else will see it. If enough people ask, they might do a general clarification that everybody can read. So this slide tells you how to do that, and if you just go to destinationimagination.org, you can follow those leads to get there too. So.
And if you do have a team clarification, be sure to print it out and bring it to tournament so the appraisers can easily see that.
And also, we talked about the published clarifications. Those are things that enough people asked so that they thought it was something everyone should have access to. And sometimes it can change how it interprets the challenge. So it's really important as team manager that you keep up on the published clarifications, because there have been years where something got published and they never, once they got their team registered, they never went back to the website, and so they didn't realize that something had been published that kind of affected how the challenge should be looked at.
Go ahead, Allie.
And here's some great resources. So this is just beyond DI or DI.org. We also have DIColorado.com specifically. There you'll find links and resources to our calendar, which shows trainings, other webinars, videos of this webinar if you want to go back and review anything like that. We also have some references for some improv games, which are especially important when you guys are practicing. And then we also have the calendar includes other tournaments. So definitely can go and watch other teams for inspiration, see how the older kids are doing it if you have a younger team. And it's always just great to see what other people are doing and be able to learn from other creativity. And then always just email us too if you have any questions. And I believe if anybody came to the in-person training last weekend or is going to the next in-person training, we also have a printout of a few additional resources for improv as well. So we can email those over when we email this PowerPoint or PDF over, whichever form it ends up being.
And I
Also,
thought,
if you're attending the live training in either Southwest or Western Slope, they'll probably have the same materials. I'm sure you guys have sent them.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I added Marianne to this slide, but I guess I didn't. So Marianne Goff at the beginning, your affiliate challenge master also. I will fix that. So.
Oh, wow, and we've made it to the end.
So have fun.
Wait, is there an improv club in Denver or Boulder?
I know there are some. I didn't add those. You can go to some improv shows, but make sure they're family friendly. If you have young kids. So I believe there are some in the Denver area, but I'm not sure what they are. Maybe I can look that up.
I know there's definitely a couple I've been to, and I can't remember the names of any of them off the top of my head either. But if you Google improv in Denver, you'll get lots of lists. There's 5 or 6 different ones that I know of. And if you go to their websites, they'll usually say family friendly. If it doesn't say that, I would probably not take a group to see that.
The person asking has high schoolers, so she might be okay. But I think it's the Bovine Metropolitan Theater or something that has, I think, something to that.
There is one that I know has free improv shows on Wednesdays, although I'm forgetting what the name of it is. I'm trying to Google it on my phone. We'll see how fast I am. Oof.
So the main purpose is for you and your team to have fun. You may have to leave the room sometimes because there may be tears, not just them, but you. There are frustrations, but you learn to cooperate and have teamwork. And then there's always food involved because they're always hungry. So you might get parents to bring snacks each time you have meetings or whatever, or have them bring their own snacks. But yeah. It's just have fun, and you learn so much in this program.
So a team manager from Boulder said that the Bovine Metropolis has a great show on New Year's Eve at noon for only $10 called New Year's Eves, and it's family friendly.
There's also a drop-in improv class on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30 at Voodoo Comedy Playhouse, and it is free with a $5 suggested donation.
Wow. All right.
There you go.
And I think they have free stand-up or improv on Wednesday nights as well. So maybe just check into Voodoo Comedy too.
All right.
But we mentioned earlier about improv encyclopedia and things like that. It's a really good way to help your kids kind of build teamwork and camaraderie by playing some of these games. Because improv, it can be difficult. You have to learn how to work together and trust each other. And that's kind of what the point of a lot of these games are. So find some that you like and let the kids play them.
And also remember, as team manager, your most important role, of course, according to your team at least, is where's the food? The bottom right down there, the WTF.
Yeah.
Did we have any other questions that popped up? Great.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you would like us to email you this PowerPoint, just send us your email. Or Kate, do you have their emails? Or
Yes, I have all the emails, so we'll send them on. If you guys, I have them in my inbox, so I'll send them out to you guys.
okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'd be happy to email them, and we'll just email that to you, and then you can do what you want with it. And yeah, we're happy you were with us tonight, and we hope to see you at our regionals tournaments.
Thank you so much for joining.
Have
Thank
fun.
you guys. Have a nice night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.